On a quiet suburban street in Long Island, a woman opened her front door to a stranger. She would be shot in the face, but she would survive. And the story that followed would become one of the most sensational crime cases in American history, not because of what happened, but because of who controlled the narrative afterward. This is the true story of Joe and Mary Jo Buttafuoco and Amy Fisher, and you're watching A Veil of Crime. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, Joe Buttafuoco was a married auto body shop owner in Massapequa, New York. He lived with his wife, Mary Jo, and their children in a middle-class neighborhood that appeared ordinary from the outside. Amy Fisher was a teenager, 16 years old, when she met Joe Buttafuoco while working at a local salon. Joe was in his mid-30s at the time. What followed was an illegal sexual relationship between a married adult man and a minor. Joe later denied its seriousness, but Amy did not. Amy Fisher believed that Joe would leave his wife for her, and Joe did not. Instead, the relationship grew volatile. Amy felt discarded. Joe wanted the situation to just disappear. On June 30th, 1992, Amy Fisher went to the Buttafuoco home while Joe was at work. Mary Jo answered the door. Amy introduced herself using a false name. Then she pulled out a gun. She shot Mary Jo in the face. The bullet shattered Mary Jo's jaw, damaged her facial nerves, and caused permanent injuries. Miraculously, she survived. Amy Fisher fled the scene, but was arrested shortly afterward. At first, Joe Buttafuoco claimed that he barely knew her, but that claim collapsed under evidence. Phone records, witness testimony, and Amy's detailed statements established the sexual relationship. Joe was charged not with the shooting, but with statutory rape. Amy Fisher ultimately pleaded guilty to first-degree assault and was sentenced to prison. Joe Buttafuoco pleaded guilty to statutory rape and served time in jail. Mary Jo Buttafuoco underwent extensive surgeries and years of recovery. The case exploded across American media. Amy Fisher was labeled the Long Island Lolita. Movies were made, tabloids sold millions of copies, and the story was framed as scandal and spectacle. But that framing often obscured the reality. A minor was groomed by an adult man. A wife nearly murdered in her own home. And the consequences were lifelong, especially for Mary Jo. Mary Jo Buttafuoco chose not to disappear. She publicly reclaimed her voice, wrote about her experience, and spoke openly about survival, betrayal, and recovery. Amy Fisher was released from prison years later, and she struggled with reintegration, repeatedly pulled back into public controversy. Joe Buttafuoco attempted to rehabilitate his public image, but the case never fully released its grip on his name. The case is often remembered for its shock value, but stripped of headlines, the crime is simple and brutal. A grown man exploited a teenager. A teenager committed a violent act. A woman paid the price with her body and her life forever altered. The truth was never sensational. It was human. Mary Jo Buttafuoco survived a gunshot to the face, but survival was only the beginning. In a case where the media chased spectacle, the real story was endurance, and endurance doesn't trend. If you value historically accurate true crime, stories told without distortion and without glorification, subscribe to A Veil of Crime. And if you'd like to support this channel and help keep these stories told with care, you can find the Buy Me a Coffee link on the channel page. Every cup helps keep the veil lifted.